Ready for a deep dive?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're tackling Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, the 2004 edition specifically.
Oh, interesting. I'm excited to dig into this one. It's been a while.
Right. And it's not your typical, sci-fi story, even though it might seem that way at first glance.
No, not at all. This one really makes you think about intelligence, about ethics. What does it even mean to be human,
Totally. And the way Keyes tells this story, whoa, through the main character, Charlie Gordon's diary entries. So we get his voice, unfiltered, as he goes through this wild experiment.
Which, speaking of unfiltered, he throws us right into the deep end, doesn't he?
With that Plato quote.
Yeah, talk about starting with a bang. Plato's cave allegory, front and center. You really got to hand it to Keyes, not exactly easing us in.
No kidding. But we should probably unpack that allegory a bit in case some listeners, aren't philosophy buffs.
Absolutely. Though I bet even if you think you know it, this book will make you see it in a whole new light. Pun intended, we'll get to
that. Okay, so Plato's cave. In a nutshell.
Imagine, you're stuck in a cave, your whole life. All you've ever seen are shadows on a wall. That's your reality.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Kind of depressing, though.
It gets better, or worse, depending how you look at it. Now imagine, someone tells you there's a whole world outside this cave, full of, color, light, things you can't even fathom right now because shadows are all you know.
Okay, that's where this ties into Charlie, right? He's about to step into that kind of light, metaphorically, with this intelligence experiment.
Exactly. But think about it. Is the person who is blinded by the sun suddenly forced to see everything, are they happier? Or is the soul content with the shadows better off?
Whoa, that is deep. And Keyes is throwing that question at us right from the get-go. Is ignorance bliss for Charlie?
Right.
What kind of light is he headed towards?
Right, and that's what makes those early progress reports of his so compelling.
Yeah.
We're seeing the world through his eyes, this guy who's desperate to be smarter.
And you can just tell how much he wants to please people, even if he doesn't fully grasp what's happening. Remember that line, I spilled ink, maybe I need new glasses?
Yes. And that pretty points bit with the ink blot test, he's just trying so hard, it's heartbreaking.
Totally. And you can't help but root for him, even though no spoilers, but those early entries, they tell you so much about him before the experiment even really starts.
Right, like how he sees himself, how others treat him. You mentioned the pretty points. It's like he just craves approval,
And that whole thing with his mom, encouraging him to learn, but also it seems like maybe he never got the right kind of help.
Absolutely. Keyes drops these hints about his family, like maybe they're gone, maybe they couldn't handle him. We don't know the full story yet, but there's a sadness there, this weight Charlie's carrying.
It's like we're only scratching the surface of his past trauma. And then there's Algernon.
The special mouse. Can't forget him.
Right, he pops up so early.
Yeah.
Why do you think Keyes does that? What's the significance of introducing Algernon right away?
He's the parallel, isn't he? Charlie's counterpart in all this. They're both going through these experiments, these transformations.
Then there's that bit about the lock on Algernon's cage. Remember, Charlie mentions it. Seems like a throwaway detail now.
Keyes doesn't do throwaway details. It'll come back around, trust me. But it's also interesting how Charlie's already fascinated by him, almost like he senses a kindred spirit.
Yeah, like he sees himself in Algernon, even at this early stage. And then there's the bakery, his little world.
Gimpy, Joe, Carp, all these characters we're meeting through Charlie's eyes before he understands how they really see him.
And that phrase, oh man, pull it Charlie Gordon. It's just awful.
But it shows you how he's already kind of a joke, even to his coworkers. And he doesn't even fully realize it.
Not yet, anyway. But there are these moments, even those jumbled early entries, where you see glimmers of something more. Remember that word he keeps using? Remember.
Oh yeah, like he's grasping at memories, trying to piece together his own past. Something's there, just out of reach.
It's like, whatever happened to him, it's connected to learning too. He mentions that teaching machine.
Which, let's be real, to pre-experiment Charlie, a TV that makes you smarter probably sounds insane.
Totally. But it shows how much he trusts Miss Kinnian, his teacher. He's willing to try anything she suggests.
And speaking of Miss Kinnian, we don't get a lot about her yet, but those little interactions, they're loaded. The way he focuses on her hands, how she touches him.
Yeah, there's a tenderness there that's missing from almost every other relationship in his life. And he's always commenting on how young she looks.
It's fascinating, right? Like, he's the one aging too fast, even though technically it's the opposite. Almost like he sees himself on a different timeline. Or maybe he's already sensing that his intelligence might come at a cost.
Man, that's heavy. Keyes is good. He doesn't waste a word, does he?
Nope. And we're just getting started.
It's amazing how much Keyes packs into these early entries, even with Charlie's unique way of writing.
Right. It's like he's giving us a puzzle, but the pieces are all jumbled up.
And we're starting to see those little clues, those details that you mentioned. Like, they seemed random at first, but now...
They're starting to feel like they mean something, right? Like foreshadowing.
Exactly. Like, is Keyes gonna, like, hit us over the head with these later, or are they more like subtle hints that we're supposed to pick up on?
I think it's a bit of both. Some are definitely going to be more obvious as Charlie's intelligence grows, but others, they're more about setting the mood, creating this sense of, like, underlying tension, like that thing with the lock on Algernon's cage. Why even mention it, right?
I mean,
Get to wonder what's going to happen.
Okay, so we got to keep an eye out for those.
Yeah.
What else? Give me another example. I'm hooked.
Well, let's talk about Miss Kinnian. We talked about her tenderness towards Charlie, how he fixates on her hands.
And how young she looks.
Right.
Right. It's a little weird, honestly, when you think about it.
It is. Especially with his whole thing about eyes, perception. It's almost like he's seeing her in a new light, literally.
Okay, yeah. And there's that line, she patted my hand. It just feels loaded, you know? Like there might be something more there than just teacher and student.
Exactly. And as Charlie gets smarter, those little hints, they start to add up. Like, remember how he keeps mentioning the name Harriet?
Harriet. Wait a minute, isn't that...
Miss Kinnian's first name. Charlie doesn't put it together yet, but we do. And suddenly, those fragmented memories, they take on a whole new meaning.
Whoa, you're blowing my mind here. So it's like all these seemingly random details are actually connected to his past, his relationship with Miss Kinnian.
And potentially to the experiment itself. Remember those recurring images of light and darkness? Eyes, mirrors?
Yeah, it's like Keyes is creating this visual language to show us how Charlie's perception of the world and of himself is changing.
Exactly. And how those changes might not be entirely positive. Think about the way Charlie wants to be laughed with, not at. It's heartbreaking, because even as he gets smarter, he still craves that acceptance, that connection.
And those guys at the bakery. It makes you wonder, are they really as mean as Charlie thinks? Or is it just his perception?
Right. Are they intentionally cruel, or are they just, oblivious? We're only seeing them through Charlie's eyes, and his view is definitely skewed, especially with how badly he wants to be seen as smart.
He's so desperate for that validation that he might be projecting, right? Seeing things that aren't really there.
Or missing things that are. It's like those ink blot tests. What we see often says more about us than it does about the ink blot itself.
Man, that is so true. And it makes you question everything, doesn't it? Like, whose version of the story are we supposed to believe?
That's the beauty of it. Keyes doesn't give us easy answers. He wants us to wrestle with these questions, to confront our own biases.
And to remember that there are always multiple perspectives. Just like in Plato's cave, right? We're all limited by what we can see and understand.
Exactly. And sometimes the most important truths are the ones hidden in the shadows.
So we're starting to question everything now. The bakery guys, Miss Kinnian, even Charlie's own memories. It's like, whose version of this story are we supposed to trust?
That's the brilliance of Keyes, right? He makes us work for it. There's no, clear-cut, good guy, bad guy. Everyone's a little bit in the shadows,
And as readers, we're kind of in the dark too, at least to some extent. Like, we only get Charlie's perspective, but how much can we rely on that even before the experiment really kicks in?
Exactly. And that's what we have to keep in mind as we go forward. Like, are we getting the full picture of his life before, his family, what happened with them, why he ended up at the bakery?
Right, there are so many unanswered questions. We get those snippets, like about him living with his Uncle Herman and then Warren stayed home. But it's like, puzzle pieces are missing. Makes you wonder what he's not telling us.
Or what he doesn't even realize he's not telling us. That's the thing about memory, right? It's not always reliable. And as Charlie's intelligence changes, who knows what else might come bubbling up?
Okay, now I'm kind of scared, but also super intrigued. It's like, we have to be detectives alongside Charlie, trying to figure out what's real, what's his perception, what's actually happening with the experiment.
Exactly. And not just about the science of it all, but the emotional side. Like, we talked about those recurring motifs, the eyes, the light and darkness, Charlie wanting to be laughed with. Those become even more powerful when you realize how much he craves connection, how much of those things are tied to his sense of self-worth.
Yeah, and that need to be seen, truly seen for who he is. That's something we can all relate to, right? No matter how intelligent we are. It's like a universal human thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Flowers for Algernon so timeless, so powerful. It's about those very human desires, those fears and hopes that we all share.
So as we finish up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away? What should they be thinking about as they maybe pick up the book for the first time or even reread it?
I'd say pay attention to those silences, those gaps in the story, because often that's where the most important truths are hiding. Keyes isn't going to spell everything out for us, and that's okay. It's in those spaces and those unanswered questions that we really start to grapple with the big stuff.
I mean, you said it, the big stuff, intelligence, ethics, what it means to be human. Keyes really went there.
He did, and he did it in a way that stays with you long after you finish the last page.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that was quite a journey. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Flowers for Algernon. If you haven't already, grab a copy and buckle up. Trust us, it's an experience you won't soon forget.